Good morning, or good afternoon, or wherever you're living, it might be a different time. Anyway, so I decided to get back to the Lorenzo Bates um, story about his life, his wife, his kids. Um, some of you remember, I think it's one of the first videos I did back in the day, and I just looked at it as kind of one of those storybook romance stories that looked like that. And so they both grew up on farms in Pennsylvania, and Lorenzo, at a young age, he did go out to Iowa, and she stayed behind. But the way it said in her obituary, that most people knew that she was smitten and had fallen in love with this guy he was a little bit older than her. And so, but they waited, and he ended up, eventually he worked on other people's farms, and then he was able to earn enough money, so he bought a farm before she even came out there. And when I did the story, the other video, it talked a lot about Muscadine, Iowa. And she had to go down the rivers and up to Mississippi. And yeah, for me, it was kind of like one of the ones that kind of, was fun to do. And, and you never know, what starts out as fun, what kind of things that can come up in our lives on a regular basis if you're not, So anyway, yeah, his name was Lorenzo D. Bates, and her name was Teresa. They've had a lot of different spellings on it, but that's as close as I can kind of get it to. Um, and so he was waiting there at Muscadine for her, and that very afternoon, they got married. And then it was, a good distance kind of away for them to go back to where the farm was. And so she moved into the farm, and they started their life together. And in that time period of their life that I'm calling their life, kind of goes hand in hand with that they had like 10 kids also. And so as I was working on this the last couple days, um I'm really enjoying being able to take the time and um really research. Sometimes my videos, what I give you is probably, 20 to 25 minutes of the story, but it may take me a couple days to really fine tune. And today was a lot of reading documents, because he ended up going into the Civil War when that was happening. And so I was really fine toothing and looking and learning more about, what was going on there. And evidently, reading her obituary, the way it was written, she was a very active person in their community of Olin, Iowa. And I know, I think one of the videos I actually went there. I've been there a couple times, with the family first. When we were traveling around, we went there and did the rubbings on the headstones, and found the grave sites. And then I went back once again by myself, just to go back. And I really enjoy, like, when I can stand on the site of where, their farmhouse was, and go to the cemeteries, and feel a part of that community that they would have lived. And they both had long lives, and these 10 kids. So about halfway through, when I was working on the kids, I noticed that um, everything looked like it was going really smooth. Their first son, he um, became a lawyer, and he got married, and he moved a little ways away, but they're to he probably would have had to be a lawyer. That was way too small of a town, and so he went to Des Moines. And so then then it goes down through each one of the kids, and they they start out like really, I have a pattern to my madness when I do genealogy. I always look for the record to confirm their birth dates and usually their death dates and where they were at those periods of time. And then I go to all the census reports, which are usually, back then were about 10 months or, yeah. So it'd be like, yeah, 10 months, like 1900, 1910. But, this is back in 1860 and 1870. And I always go through all those. And I always want to look at the the backup that Ancestry.com has provided us, but I always like to read the actual um, piece of paper, the census copy of the census report, and they give you a great deal of information on um, more than sometimes you probably need or want, but it's good because you don't know at what point you might use it. And I think by me doing that, I have over time, found a lot of different. So what as I was going along doing these other brothers and sisters. You know, I was just about getting ready to take a break yesterday, and I was sitting there thinking, will I be able to stretch this out to 22 minutes if each one of these kids, as they were, going along, if they were born, they got their a lot of them were farmers. A lot of them ended up being farmers, far more farmers than I realized out there. But there was a good living to me be made in back in those days. And so anyway, I sort of took my break and I came back, and so I started working on I don't even know for sure where exactly I was, but one of their um, children. So Thomas, yeah, I think Thomas was the first one, and he was born in um, 1859, and he died in 1861. And right now, all the research I've tried to do, I've been trying to Google and check all the records. A lot of times they give the death certificates, which I personally, is probably because of some of my medical backgrounds and retiring out of the hospital. I like to have the copy of the original death certificate, so you can tell what, there's a wealth of information on there. But I'm always kind of looking to see what happened, because that was, not that was a red flag to me. So then right after that, so Thomas comes and goes, and then Charles E, he was born the year that Thomas died, and so it was 1861, and he died in 1863. So both those baby young guys um, just died. And and before I started doing this video today, I was still looking for something to see if there was, a smallpox outbreak or something going on that was affecting younger kids at that time. But, made me sad too, because I see this family and I'm following it along, um and it has like, um you know that's hard to think about, even if you have 10 kids, to they weren't like stillborns. They were born and they were, you know, I think 3 and 4. That's really tough, for a mom and dad to deal with. And actually, that kind of caught my eye. And then there was Alice. Now, Alice actually, she got married to a man by Holden was the name, and they actually had a child. And then at some point she got sick, and so when I was doing her obituary, there was a lot of information, and there was not only his medical record chart notes of his death, record of death, but there was hers. And so it, stopped me for a while, and I really needed to do more research on that because I know I know enough about the terminology and taken classes in terminology, and so sometimes it's interesting to me because she was fairly young. She wasn't like an older person, and one of the things I realized is that she actually ended up in a state hospital. And as I was going through each one of the tenure between, um, it looked like she was there for 40 years. And so then when I read the chart notes, I was really wondering. And one of the things that they mentioned, they'll say what the primary was and what, there's usually about three or four, and they're like in order as far as the um, how serious it'll say something to the effect. It's almost like you could die of this, but there's other things that have been going on in your life. And so when I looked at her, um, she definitely had some, it was kind of something to the effect that the blood in her veins were just getting, you know, almost like clogged up. And that was kind of the first of so there was a connection to the heart. And I've been really kind of sensitive to heart problems lately with the genealogy, just to see how that's running genetically. Uh, but anyway, then it said dementia. And, when I think of dementia, there's definitely something that goes along with that. But that's something that affects, it's just a part of aging, and that's what they've called it for many, many years, is dementia. And then there was the word that was the in front of it was precox dementia. And so I had to, check and see. My computer tells me how to pronounce things, and so I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I looked up what it meant, and so it was a special level of dementia. It wasn't just dementia, but it was more serious than regular dementia. So I kept reading, and then eventually it did say that she had was a schizophrenic person. So she was hospitalized for that for all those years. And um, you don't uh, there's a different way we handle medical situations, which is, we don't really have as many people ending up in, especially dementia. There's a lot of ways that they can help people live with dementia and not have to just be hospitalized. A lot of medication for schizophrenia, if they take their medication, that helps them a great deal also. But back then, the answer was put her in the state facility. And so that was so after, finding out that, then yeah, I think I know what it was. Her main diagnosis was a bronchopneumonia. So you'll see that quite often. And that's something that, you know, if you already have an ailment, you might be a little bit less likely to die of it. But, if you have other issues going on, there's a lot of pneumonias and the bronchial problems and breathing problems, and what I see a lot of, as far as reading the chart notes and the death certificates. But like, I'm still kind of bugged about the two little kids, and I want to know, I think this is a way for me to kind of satisfy my urge to be actively involving my brain in learning things, because I want to know. I mean, it's interesting to me. It kind of runs heavy in my veins, as far as it's not very easy for me to run out of things that intrigue me, or for me to learn over again. So, then I went through a number of, and her husband, he eventually he had he died, but it was like, on her death certificate, for a husband, it said unknown, but there wasn't a divorce. It was just like he must have probably left her there. And I don't even know for sure. I should have looked that up to see where that state facility was, how far away she was from the rest of the world. But I don't, it didn't sound like it probably made a difference. I think that was what her life was like. And that's, kind of what happened. So, then there's some other situations that came up that kind of surprised me. So there was, as I'm going down to the 10 kids, and I'm getting down closer to the bottom, there was a Benjamin Franklin is what they called him. And he actually, when I started going through the census and going through down the path that, there's lots of other hints and ideas and, things that I can look at, but I'm kind of like, I like to know, because it says where they are, especially when I'm reading the census reports. And so Benjamin was in Portland, Oregon. And I haven't figured out totally other than now, I don't remember it being anything that I was made aware of really in regards to, passing on of stories. So he was number 9 child. And then number 10 was Nellie Electra Bates. So Nellie was my connection. So Nellie was my grandmother's, and we all called her Grandma Porter. And so the name Porter doesn't really mean anything um, in regards to genealogy because she had remarried but we always called her Grandma Porter. And that was her mom. So Nellie was the 10th child. So I'm kind of thinking that Benjamin maybe went out there because Nellie would have been out there. She would have been out. Nellie moved around a lot, but it was a lot for different reasons. And so she was in Oregon some, and she was in Washington, and she died in Seattle. And she had, a lot of her relatives on the other side, not on the Bates side, moved around, and she had people out there to visit. So I'm kind of waiting to do a little bit more research, I think, on Benjamin to see if there's some connection, if that's why he went out there, because that seems kind of unusual to be born and raised in Iowa in a small town and then end up in Portland, Oregon. So, and when I say that, I feel bad, and I was just thinking about it because, you know, I'm always still doing the genealogy part, and I say, well, maybe that's something I need to go look at. Well, I can't ever finish anything completely because there's so much information that fits in together with this that um if it was done and I sent it out a video, then I'd say, okay, I'm done with that. But there's more work that I'll be doing on the Bates family. And in fact, I want to know more about Lorenzo Bates's connection to Pennsylvania and find out if his mother and dad, and he has some sisters and brothers, if they ever went to Iowa to visit, or if that was just the end of that relationship. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and again, I'll probably get a little bit more information on this, maybe not, but because I did, we have a lot of copies of the military records. So Lorenzo Bates, and I'm going to read this. He was 38 years old at the time of his enlistment. Now, across the board, I find that, I never, it's not like during the Vietnam War where, they were only taking the young guys and back then it didn't matter how old you were. You could, um, enlist and go, and I'm sure he wanted to go, but he was 38 years old. And so it says he mustered out August 30th, 1862. And so that's close to the beginning of the Civil War. And immediately he was promoted to a second sergeant. I think he was educated. I really think he was educated in Pennsylvania before he went out to Iowa. So that could be, because then they gave him another position, in the military, and it was, I got the company name, and they call themselves volunteer infantry is kind of like what he was, but in the infantry he was a sergeant, and so so I've been kind of googling a lot, trying to find out. So what I have in here is I have more or less his, part of his record, his military records, and I have more information about his pension. He got a pension, and that was probably the problem about taking somebody at that age. I mean, that's almost 40, probably by the time he had to walk from Iowa. I always heard the story. I have not, well, it's interesting because I have seen Mississippi, that the soldiers from Iowa walked, they marched. They didn't say walked. They marched to Mississippi, and they were also in Louisiana. And so it was, I think that a lot of complications. In fact, there was a statistical, there were 17,000 Iowa soldiers, and out of that, it seemed like it was 13,000. Um, 13,000 of those died, but a lot of them didn't die from from the, the actual war, you know, being shot or taken, as an enemy. I don't know. It's they died of other illnesses, and I know that when he came back, he had enough issues going on with varicose veins and other things, which most of it referred to were walking, marching. And I don't know if they marched along and sang and what they did, but I just barely make it to my postal box out there, and I can't imagine marching. Although when I was younger and healthier, if somebody would have said, "Well, hey, let's march downtown Denver," I would think, well, okay. And then if we got tired, we could get a Uber or something, get us back home. But now I have to watch just how far I do walk. And so he got his pension and finally got to come home. And one of the things that was interesting that changed Olin, which is the little farming community, was men were the school teachers. It wasn't women. There was no women school teachers. It was all men. Well, all those men left for the war. And so all these women then had to become the school teachers. And from that point forward, when the men came back, they just let the women continue to do that. And the other thing the women were doing were they all had to keep running. That was 4 years. The Civil War lasted 4 years. And he was gone like three some years, and she had the responsibility of the farm and the kids and the situations that come up. And they sent they were sending food and crops and everything to the military to feed the guys. So it was a tough time, but they really believed in why they were going to war. They really, and it was interesting. I mean, everybody thinks of the Civil War being a war mostly about the slaves, which it was, but there were some other things going on that had made people really concerned about, the losing the continuity of the country that was they were forming, and then they were making this line in the sand and drawing a line in the south was going to be the south, and in the north, and that it was just getting really complicated. And so there was these people really believed and they were very patriotic, and it didn't give it a second thought that they wouldn't go, and I'm sure there was people older than Lorenzo at 38 that went. I mean, they could, but I keep trying to find, or I saw some pictures of some slaves during that period of time, and they were leaving the South, trying to get up north where they would be safe from slavery. And they actually had a few horses, but I don't know how these guys marched as the distance they marched. And even when they brought him back as a unit, they kind of stopped him, left him at Davenport, Iowa, and then from there he had to march back to Olin, which was, it sounds it sounds different to me, but I know people who probably were in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War, whatever. I mean, they probably have a better understanding. I think I've seen enough movies about World War II, especially in Vietnam. I usually watched all those, and my relatives have always been in the wars. My brother was in Vietnam. My dad was in World War II. His dad was in World War I, and so there has been that connection of um, I, I I I would think in some of the cases, Vietnam was a little bit harder, but some of the cases that the people really wanted to fight for a reason, and so they were definitely involved. But and then when they got back, she ended up, and I maybe it was after Lorenzo died, but his pension went to her, and so I have all the paperwork. Excuse me, allergies are kind of bothering me, but so I have those, and so it's probably why I need a big magnifying glass or something because it's all excuse me, it's all handwritten and small print, and they want to like put a lot of swirls on everything, and so it takes some patience to actually read those um, records, but the copies are there. And other than that, I think that's about what I had planned for today. And I will, probably, I will, s- well, I'm not even going to say, I won't make any promises. I was going to say I would continue on. I'd like to do more, take the Bates and go back and Teresa or Teresa or however they pronounced her, see what their family life and where that is. So I'm still kind of getting back on that East Coast, even though I'm finding that. Oh, I know I wanted to share because I have my desk here and computer and monitor and just 1 minute. So I have. See, at the same time I'm doing the genealogy, I'm trying to go paperless, and I've talked about that before. But then I have these folders, and I'm trying to get rid of those papers. I'm doing really good because I'm putting a lot of it into a Google Drive so that the information is readily available to continue on my search. And then all the data that's in ancestry.com, other people can access that. I want, especially my grandkids, if they're interested, to be able to to see the work that I've done, and usually it jumps a generation. Although my son in Boise, DJ, he's had his DNA done, and he talks to me about genealogy and what I'm doing with it. But anyway, back to my I have all these little pieces of paper here, and I put a different surname on each one. And I stirred it up and I reached and I pulled out Bates. So that's how I got the last couple of days going. So but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But it's been, I go, when I do the videos, I feel connected. I see you on the other end of it. I really appreciate when the comments come in and um, the people that have subscribed, and that's going up a little bit. Uh, there's a lot of people like watching what I'm doing and commenting and reading the whole entire thing. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And because it's pretty fun for me to do it. Anyway, I think that's about it. I'm going to sign off and go get a little dinner. Bye.